Blood on surgical gloves. 10 of the world's most expensive doctors frozen in that Minnesota operating room, watching a cleaning woman's hands do what their combined $4 million in medical degrees couldn't: turn a dying baby with nothing but touch and a prayer her grandmother taught her on an island 8,000 miles away. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. What happened next challenges everything you think you know about who gets to save lives. Let's go back to the moment everything started falling apart. Mayo Clinic's Secure Wing, Rochester, Minnesota. February midnight, the kind of cold that makes your lungs burn when you breathe. Armed guards stood outside double doors most people didn't even know existed. This wasn't where regular patients went. This was where billionaires paid for miracles. Inside, chaos. Heart monitor beeping. 141 beats per minute. Dropping. 10 doctors panicking. 1 baby dying. The surgical lights hummed overhead, casting harsh white glare across a scene that shouldn't have been possible. 10 specialists, flown in from across the world: India, United Kingdom, Germany, Switzerland, United Arab Emirates, Canada, Australia, Israel, Belgium, Japan. Combined salaries, $400,000 per hour. The best obstetric minds money could buy. All of them saying the same impossible thing. There was no way to save them both. At the center of it all stood Min Jae Park. 38 years old, Korean, ruthless, the kind of man Twin Cities News whispered about but never named directly. His import company moved more than shipping containers from Seoul to Minneapolis. Everyone knew it. No one said it. He wore a black suit that cost more than most people's cars. His hands were perfectly still at his sides, but his eyes were the eyes of a man watching his entire world collapse. On the surgical table lay his wife, Amara Morgan, 29, Jamaican, beautiful even now, even terrified, even 38 weeks pregnant with a baby that couldn't be born. The lead surgeon was explaining the situation for the third time. Dr. Helena Bergstrom, 52, Swedish. Her credentials read like a medical fantasy: Oxford, Johns Hopkins, 30 years of high-risk obstetrics. She'd delivered royalty. She'd saved mothers everyone else had given up on. But tonight, her voice carried an edge of defeat. Mr. Park, the baby is breech. Not just breech, posterior asynclitic presentation, spine to spine with your wife. The skull is compressing the birth canal in a position we cannot safely deliver vaginally. Min Jae's jaw tightened. Then do the surgery. A doctor with a thick German accent stepped forward. The blood clotting disorder. If we perform a C-section, she hemorrhages. Fatal. We lose her in minutes. Then wait for the baby to turn. The baby won't turn on its own, Dr. Bergstrom said. Her hands gripped the edge of the surgical tray. Every minute we wait, we're risking permanent brain damage. We're at 141 beats per minute now. When it drops below 110, we're looking at severe neurological complications or death. An Australian doctor checked the monitors. 139 now. Min Jae's voice dropped to a register that made everyone in the room understand exactly who they were dealing with. Find another way. Dr. Bergstrom exchanged glances with her colleagues, 10 of the most accomplished obstetricians on the planet. Collective centuries of experience, millions of dollars in education, state-of-the-art equipment, unlimited resources. None of it mattered. They were trapped between 2 fatal choices: cut Amara open and watch her bleed to death on the table, or wait and watch their baby's brain shut down from oxygen deprivation. A doctor from Canada spoke softly. Mr. Park, we need to make a decision. Soon. The decision is you save them both. Min Jae's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. In his world, failure had consequences, the kind that came with addresses, lifespans. 137 beats per minute, 135. The monitor's rhythm was slowing, a countdown clock measuring in heartbeats. Dr. Bergstrom turned back to her team. Their faces said everything. They'd exhausted every option, they'd consulted, they'd debated, they'd reviewed every possible intervention. External cephalic version, the standard procedure for turning breech babies, required conditions they didn't have. Amara's clotting disorder made any aggressive manipulation too dangerous. The baby was too far descended, the position too severe. They had nothing left. In the hallway outside, barely visible through the small circular window in the door, something caught the harsh fluorescent light. A yellow mop bucket. Plastic. Faded. The kind cleaned 1,000 times, but never quite loses the stains. It sat on wheels that squeaked. Next to it, a gray cart holding industrial cleaner, rubber gloves, and rags that smelled like bleach and ammonia. The kind of thing doctors walk past 100 times a day without seeing. The kind of thing that's invisible. But standing next to that bucket, gripping the mop handle with hands permanently stained by chemicals, was a woman who wasn't looking at the door. She was looking through the circular window, watching. Her brown eyes tracked every movement inside that operating room. She saw the monitors, the dropping heart rate, the desperate consultations. She saw Dr. Bergstrom's hands trembling as she explained the impossible situation one more time. And she recognized what none of those 10 doctors had realized yet. She'd seen this exact position before, 17 times, in places where there were no operating rooms. No surgical backup, no monitors beeping countdown clocks to disaster, just mothers, babies, and hands that knew what to do. She'd never lost one. But standing outside that room, invisible to everyone who mattered, was a woman holding a mop who'd seen this exact situation 17 times before. And she'd never lost a baby. Her name was Adama L'Esperance. And 3 hours earlier, she had no idea her life was about to change forever. 3 hours earlier, Adama L'Esperance pushed her mop cart down the same hallway she'd cleaned for the past 3 years. The wheels squeaked. They always squeaked. She'd asked maintenance to fix them twice. They never did. $12 an hour. That's what Mayo Clinic paid her to be invisible. Her hands gripped the mop handle, hands permanently stained by industrial cleaner, no matter how many times she scrubbed them. The chemicals seeped into her skin. Bleach, ammonia, that sharp, burning smell that lived in her clothes, her hair, the back of her throat. After 3 years, she didn't notice it anymore. But everyone else did. They stepped around her, moved their expensive shoes away from her mop bucket, doctors in pristine white coats brushing past without a glance. She was furniture, a fixture, part of the building itself. The polished marble floors reflected everything. Faces she'd never speak to. Credentials she'd never have. A world that existed 3 feet above her bent back. Her spine ached. The kind of ache that starts at the base and crawls up vertebra by vertebra until it lives in your shoulders, your neck, behind your eyes. She was 47. Some days she felt 70. Every month, she did the math. $12 an hour. 40 hours a week. Sometimes they gave her overtime, time and a half for holidays when wealthier people stayed home with their families. Minus rent for her studio apartment in the cheapest part of Rochester. Minus food, minus bus fare. Minus the cost of replacing her one pair of work shoes when the soles wore through. What remained? $400. Sent to Seychelles, to her sister, to feed 3 children who called her auntie on video calls and asked when she was coming home. She never told them she couldn't afford the plane ticket. Hadn't been able to for 3 years. The money was why she was here. The only reason that mattered to the people who signed her paychecks. But there was another reason. One she never spoke about. One that lived in her hands and her memory, and the 23 years she'd spent in rural Ethiopia before America happened to her. 847 babies. That's how many she'd delivered. Not in hospitals. Not with monitors and surgical lights and teams of specialists. In villages where the nearest clinic was 40 miles of dirt road away. Where mothers labored on straw mats by kerosene lamplight. Where Adama's hands were the only things standing between life and death. Her mother taught her. Her mother's mother before that. 4 generations of Seychelloise midwives who knew things medical textbooks didn't teach. How to feel a baby's position through a mother's belly. How to guide a breech birth without surgery. How to turn a baby that everyone else said couldn't be turned. In Ethiopia, people called her when their wives went into labor. They trusted her. They knew her name. In America, her credentials didn't exist. No medical license, no certification they recognized. Just an immigrant with a mop who cleaned the floors where real doctors saved lives. Earlier that evening, she'd been mopping the obstetrics wing, 2nd floor. The doctor's lounge door was propped open. She heard 2 residents talking. One mentioned breech presentation and emergency C-section. Adama's hands had paused mid-scrub. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Most breech babies can turn. You just have to know how to ask them. But she kept mopping, kept her head down. Knowledge without credentials was just noise. A security guard appeared at the end of the hallway. Tall, young, the kind who followed rules because someone told him they mattered. He walked toward her, eyes on her cleaning cart. "You're on the wrong floor," he said. Not unkind, just factual. 3rd floor closes at 11 p.m. Adama nodded, started to turn her squeaky cart around. She knew the schedules, knew which wings locked down when, knew how to stay invisible by staying where she was supposed to be. But then the emergency alarm shattered the silence. Piercing, urgent, the sound that meant someone was dying. The guard's radio crackled. He ran toward the secure wing, the one with armed guards and double doors, the one where Adama had never been allowed to clean. She should have turned around, should have pushed her cart back to the supply closet, should have clocked out and caught her bus home. Instead, she followed the sound of shouting. Something in her body recognized what her mind hadn't processed yet. That alarm, that specific urgency. She'd heard it before, not in Minnesota, in Addis Ababa. 2007. A mother screaming on a straw mat, a baby stuck. Spine to spine, the position everyone said was impossible, but Adama's hands had moved with certainty. 3 points of pressure. The triangle. The baby had turned. The cry of life filled the room. She'd never lost one. If you're watching this and haven't subscribed, it actually hurts to put hours into these stories and see people leave without supporting. Hit that subscribe button. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It means everything. At 11:47 p.m., the emergency alarm shattered what remained of the third-floor corridor's silence. Adama's mop hit the floor. She didn't decide to run. Her legs just moved. Toward the sound, toward the secure wing, toward the small circular window in the double doors. What she saw through that window made her blood freeze. A woman on a surgical table. Pregnant. Surrounded by doctors in expensive suits, arguing in 3 different languages. And on the monitor above the bed, a heart rate dropping. 1 or 39. 1 or 37. The exact rhythm of death approaching. Because the woman on that gurney was dying the exact same way she'd seen mothers die in Ethiopia, when no one with the right knowledge was there to help. Adama pressed her face closer to the circular window. Her breath fogged the glass. Inside that operating room, 10 doctors surrounded the surgical table like a council of gods who just discovered they were mortal. Amara Morgan lay in the center. Her dark skin glistened with sweat. Her hands gripped the rails so hard her knuckles had gone pale. Terror lived in her eyes, the kind Adama had seen too many times before. The kind that asked a silent question, "Am I going to die tonight?" Minjae Park paced behind the doctors, back and forth, like a caged animal who knew the cage was made of something worse than bars. It was made of helplessness, of money that couldn't buy the one thing he needed, of power that meant nothing when your wife and child were dying. Dr. Helena Bergstrom stood at the head of the surgical table. 52. Swedish, her silver hair pulled back in a perfect bun that probably took 15 minutes every morning. She wore her authority like armor, shoulders back, chin up, voice carrying the weight of 3 decades saving lives. But right now that voice trembled. "Mr. Park, I need you to understand what we're facing. Your wife has posterior asynclitic presentation. The baby's skull is tilted at an angle that makes vaginal delivery impossible. The spine is pressed directly against hers. We need an emergency C-section now, or we lose them both." The heart monitor beeped steadily, 141 beats per minute, then 140, 139. A doctor with a thick Canadian accent stepped forward. Younger. Maybe 35. His face carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been flown across international borders for an emergency consultation. "But the clotting disorder changes everything. If we perform surgery, she hemorrhages. We can't control it. She bleeds out in minutes." "Then you wait," Minjae said. His voice was ice. "You wait for the baby to turn." Dr. Bergstrom's hands gripped the edge of the surgical tray. Her fingers were perfectly manicured. A platinum wedding band caught the harsh surgical lights. "The baby won't turn on its own. Not from this position. Every minute we wait, we're risking permanent neurological damage to your daughter." 137 beats per minute. 1. "So you're telling me," Minjae said slowly, "that with 10 of you in this room, doctors I flew in from across the entire world, you can't save my wife and child?" Silence, the kind that screamed louder than words. A German doctor with wire-rimmed glasses spoke carefully. "Mr. Park, we've consulted. We've reviewed every possible intervention. This is an impossible situation." "Nothing is impossible." Minjae's voice dropped to a register that made everyone in that room remember exactly who they were dealing with. "Find another way." Through the window, Adama's breath came faster. Her hands pressed against the glass. She knew this position. She'd seen it 17 times. In Ethiopian villages where the nearest hospital was 40 miles of dirt road away. Where mothers labored by lamplight and the only technology was human hands that remembered what generations had taught them. 17 times. 17 mothers. 17 babies who everyone said couldn't be saved. She'd never lost one. But she wasn't in Ethiopia anymore. She was in America. Where her knowledge didn't exist on paper, so it didn't exist at all. Where speaking up meant losing the job that fed her sister's children. Where opening her mouth could get her deported, arrested, or worse. Through the glass, she watched Amara's face contort in pain, watched the monitor drop to 133 beats per minute, watched Dr. Bergstrom's hands begin to tremble as she gripped the surgical tray tighter, her platinum wedding band glinting under the lights. The doctor's jaw tightened. The armor was cracking. What would you do if your knowledge could save a life but cost you everything? Adama had asked herself that question in Tigray. 2011. A mother bleeding out on a dirt floor. The village elder saying women shouldn't interfere. Adama's hands moving anyway. Saving 2 lives. Getting banned from that village for a year. But they'd lived. Mother and baby. That's what mattered. Her hand moved to the door handle. The baby can be turned. The words came out before she could stop them. 5 words. Spoken in accented English through the crack in the door. 5 words that cut through the chaos like a knife through surgical drapes. Everything stopped. 10 heads swiveled toward the door. Toward a cleaning woman in a faded gray uniform that smelled like bleach and ammonia. Toward someone who wasn't supposed to be there, wasn't supposed to see this, wasn't supposed to speak. Dr. Bergstrom's face went from pale to crimson. Excuse me? Security, remove this woman. An Australian doctor near the monitors barely looked up. This is absurd. She's a janitor. The German doctor shook his head. We don't have time for this. But something in Minjae Park's eyes changed. He held up one hand. Everyone froze. Wait, his gaze locked onto Adama. What did you say? Dr. Bergstrom's voice turned venomous, sharp enough to cut. Mr. Park, this woman is a janitor. She has no medical training, no credentials, no legal right to even be in this conversation. If you listen to her, you're not just being foolish, you're being criminal. Adama's throat tightened. Security was already moving. She could see them in her peripheral vision. 2 guards, walking toward her. One had his hand on his radio. Speaking again would destroy her, cost her this job, this visa, this country, everything she'd sacrificed for, but staying silent would definitely destroy 2 others. The monitor beeped. 131 beats per minute, 129. Amara's scream cut through the room. Raw, primal, the sound of a mother who knew she was running out of time. Dr. Bergstrom grabbed Minjae's arm. If you let this woman speak again, I'll have her arrested for practicing medicine without a license. Is that what you want? To gamble your wife's life on a janitor's superstition? Security guards flanked Adama now, one on each side, their hands reaching for her arms. Minjae's eyes never left Adama's face. He was reading something there. Something in the way she stood. The certainty in her eyes. The kind of certainty that doesn't come from textbooks. It comes from doing something so many times that your hands remember even when your brain forgets. Wait, he said again, louder this time. Let her speak. Mr. Park? I said let her speak. The security guards hesitated. Dr. Bergstrom's hands were shaking now. Full tremors. Her jaw clenched so tight, Adama could see the muscles jumping. Adama's throat tightened. Security was already moving toward her. Speaking again could destroy her life. But staying silent would definitely destroy 2 others. So she said the words that would either make her a miracle worker or get her killed. 2 security guards moved in on Adama like the scene was rehearsed. One took her left arm, the other her right, fingers clamping down just tight enough to say, "You don't belong here." She didn't pull away, didn't fight. Years of being told to stay in her lane had trained her body to comply before her mind even finished the thought. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one of them said. The door was starting to swing shut when she heard the monitor. 135 beats per minute. The sound cut through her like a blade. She knew what came next. 133, 131. Then the dip that meant too late. As they pulled her backward, away from the light and steel and urgency, she twisted just enough to see Amara's face. Eyes wide, lips cracked. A tear slid sideways toward her ear as she lay on the table. Adama didn't think. The words simply rose up from the place where her training, her lineage, and her anger lived. Your wife has posterior asynclitic presentation with cord compression. The baby's head is tilted wrong. You cut her open, the pressure releases too fast, she strokes out on the table. The room went silent, the kind of silence that made the monitors suddenly sound deafening. 2 guards stopped mid-step. 10 doctors turned in unison. The nurse holding a tray of instruments froze, scalpel hovering in the air. Even the anesthesiologist's hand paused over the IV drip. Asynclitic presentation. Cord compression. Those were not janitor words. Dr. Helena Bergstrom's face flushed from pale to furious red. She stared at Adama like the cleaner had just spoken an incantation reserved for priests. How do you? Minjay's hand went up, palm out. Everyone stopped. Let her speak, he said. The security guards hesitated. Their grip loosened just enough for Adama to pull her arms free, though she didn't move closer. She stood in the doorway, half in shadow, the harsh surgical light spilling around her like she was standing at the edge of another world. Explain, Minjay said. It wasn't a request. Adama swallowed. Her heart pounded hard enough she could hear it in her ears, but her voice, when it came, was steady. For 23 years, I worked in rural Ethiopia, she said. I delivered 847 babies. My mother taught me. Her mother taught her. We've guided breech births for 4 generations. A nurse frowned. One of the doctors from Israel exchanged a look with the one from Australia. This wasn't the story they expected from a woman in a faded gray uniform. In Ethiopia, Adama continued, there were no monitors, no operating rooms, no backup surgeons in the next room, just dirt floors, kerosene lamps, women who walked for hours while in labor because there was nowhere else to go. Her eyes flicked to the monitor. 133 beats per minute. In those villages, when a baby got stuck like this, everyone said the same thing. Her voice softened. They said, it's God's will. They said, nothing can be done. But my mother didn't believe that. She taught me to listen with my hands. Dr. Bergstrom crossed her arms. It was meant to look dismissive, but her fingers still trembled against her sleeves. Mr. Park, this is anecdotal superstition, not medicine. We don't have time for stories. My certification doesn't exist here, Adama said, ignoring her. In America, I'm just a cleaner, but I've turned babies in conditions you can't imagine. Dirt floors, no electricity, no surgical backup. I've watched mothers walk out of labor with their babies in their arms after everyone else told them to start planning a funeral. She stepped 1 foot into the room now. The line had been crossed. There was no going back. I learned to feel the sutures in a baby's skull through a mother's belly, she said, to sense where the head is tilted, where the pressure is wrong. I learned exactly where to press and how long. I learned that if you force the turn, you tear something. If you rush it, you crush the cord. If you panic, they both die. The Japanese doctor spoke for the first time. You're describing modified external cephalic version. They call it Webster technique here, Adama said. You've given it a name and studied it in textbooks. We've done it with our hands for 80 years. She looked directly at Minjay now. Really looked at him, saw the fear under the anger, the man under the myth. I can turn your baby, she said quietly, without cutting. But if I fail... She let the sentence hang in the air like smoke. I know you'll have me killed. A muscle in his jaw jumped. Across the room, Amara's hand lifted weakly from the sheet. It trembled as it reached toward empty air, fingers curling as if searching for someone to hold. Please, she whispered, voice raw. Let her try. Some say what she did next was brave. Others call it criminal. Tell me in the comments, was she right to risk it? The nurse near the monitor swallowed hard. Heart rate 131, she said. We're losing fetal variability. We are out of time, the Canadian doctor said. We need to act now. No, snapped the German doctor. If we cut, she bleeds out on the table. And if we wait, the Australian added, the baby sustains irreversible brain damage. The argument swirled, colliding in midair. Surgery, wait, risk, lawsuit, ethics board, professional reputation, prison. In their world, the stakes were malpractice and career suicide. In Minjai's world, the stakes were simpler, life or death, for his wife, for his child, for anyone who disappointed him. He looked at the monitors. 129 beats per minute. Every number that flashed might as well have been a bullet counting down in slow motion. If you touch my wife, he said, eyes locked on Adama, and either of them dies, you're right. I will kill you myself. No one doubted him. The room seemed to contract around his words. The air grew thicker. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. But if you save them... He turned slowly, looking at each doctor in turn. If she saves them, after 10 of you couldn't even give me another option, you will listen to her. You will learn from her. You will remember that letters after your name don't make you gods. He looked back at Adama. Everyone step back, he ordered. She has 5 minutes. Dr. Bergstrom shook her head, outrage and panic warring in her eyes. This is madness. She's not licensed. This hospital will lose everything if this goes wrong. I will not be party to. You already are, Minjay said. You told me there was no way to save them both. She's offering one. Heart rate 127 beats per minute. A nurse's voice trembled. We're losing fetal viability. Deceleration's becoming prolonged. The doctors looked at one another. All their years of training, their conferences, their published papers, squeezed into a single, humiliating moment. They stepped back. The security guards let go of Adama's arms completely now. No one told them to. They just did. Adama walked toward the table. Her sneakers squeaked on the polished floor. Each step sounded loud in the heavy silence, like a metronome counting down the seconds left before disaster. She reached the side of the bed, saw Amara's face up close for the first time, saw the fear, the trust, the silent question in her eyes. Are you sure? Adama nodded once. Her chemical-worn hands moved toward Amara's belly, and just as her fingertips brushed the taut skin, Dr. Boss, Helena Bergstrom whispered something that made every doctor in that room go silent. Wait, she breathed. I know who you are. Because 6 years earlier, Adama L'Esperance wasn't cleaning hospital floors. She was making medical history in a place the world had forgotten. For a second, no one understood what Helena had just said. The words slipped out of her almost under her breath, more to herself than to anyone else. But in that silent operating room, every syllable landed. I know who you are. Adama's fingers hovered a breath above Amara's belly. She didn't look up, couldn't afford to. One distraction, one flicker of doubt, and the connection between her hands and the life beneath them would fracture. Helena took a step closer, eyes narrowing as if she were trying to reconcile two images in her mind, the woman in a gray cleaning uniform and someone else entirely. Tigray, she whispered. The case study from 2019, the UN medical report on unassisted breech survival rates. The researcher wrote about a midwife no one could find after the war broke out. They called her a ghost because she disappeared before anyone could document her properly. Her voice steadied, awe replacing anger. That was you. The room blurred at the edges. The hum of machines, the sharp smell of antiseptic, the silent tension of 10 specialists watching, all of it faded behind a tide of memory that rose up and pulled Adama backward through time. Before Rochester, before Minnesota, before mop buckets and $12 hours. Back to where her hands first learned what they were made for. Seychelles, 1982. The air was thick and warm, carrying the scent of salt from the ocean and jasmine from the bushes outside the small, one-room house. 7-year-old Adama stood barefoot in the doorway, toes curled against the cool cement floor, watching her grandmother work. Celeste L'Esperance moved like the sea, calm on the surface, power underneath. A woman in her 40s lay on a low bed, sweat soaking her hairline, breath hitching with every contraction. The baby wouldn't come. The labor had been going on for hours. The midwives from the next village had been called and had left. They'd shaken their heads, whispered words Adama didn't yet understand. Fate. God's will. Sometimes babies didn't make it. Celeste didn't accept that. Mon Dieu, protège sa man, she whispered in Seychellois Creole, voice soft but unshakable. God protect this little mother. She rested her hand on the woman's swollen belly, fingers splayed wide. She didn't push, didn't press. She listened, not with her ears, with her skin, with the bones in her wrist, with something older than language. Come here, Tia Adama, Celeste said without looking back. Adama stepped closer, heart racing. She always felt like something sacred was happening when her grandmother worked, like the whole world held its breath, waiting to see which way the story would go. Put your hand here, Celeste murmured, guiding the girl's small fingers to the curve of the belly. The skin was hot and taut. Underneath, something moved, slow, wrong. Do you feel that? Celeste asked. Adama nodded. The baby feels stuck. Celeste smiled faintly. Exactament, stuck. The head is not where it should be. Most people, they see this and say, nothing can be done. But we are not most people. She shifted her hands, one above, one below, one to the side, 3 points of contact forming an invisible triangle around the baby. This is the triangle, she said. My mother taught it to me. Her mother taught it to her. We never force the baby. We invite. She applied pressure so gentle Adama almost couldn't see it. A breath. A suggestion. Babies are not stupid, Celeste said. They know where the door is. Sometimes they just need someone to show them how to line up with it. The woman on the bed whimpered, then gasped. Adama felt it, a subtle shift like a fish turning under the surface of a pond. The shape beneath her fingers changed, the hard curve of the skull sliding into a new position. Celeste's voice stayed low and steady. Mon Dieu, protège sa man. The baby rotated. The mother's breath hitched. A minute later, the head crowned. The room filled with the sound of new lungs taking their first furious breath. the cry of life. Celeste wrapped the baby in a faded cloth and placed it in the mother's shaking arms. Tears streamed down the woman's face. She grabbed Celeste's wrist and kissed her palm. "You saved us," she whispered. Celeste shook her head. "Nan, your body did the work. I just reminded it how." That night, as crickets sang outside and the ocean whispered in the distance, Celeste sat with Adama on the steps. "Most people think power lives in books, in degrees, in big buildings," she said, "but some power lives here." She took Adama's small hands between her own, in knowing hands, in what is passed down, not written down. She tapped the girl's forehead gently. "The world may not respect this kind of knowing, but life does, and when the world forgets, life will come find you anyway." The memory dissolved into another. Ethiopia, 1998. 19-year-old Adama stepped out of a battered bus in Addis Ababa, clutching a worn canvas bag and her grandmother's last letter. Inside were 2 dresses, a change of shoes, and a photograph of Celeste holding a newborn to her chest. In the rural outskirts, they called her the island midwife. News traveled fast. Women walked for miles while in labor just to reach her. The roads turned to mud during rainy season. Sometimes they arrived barefoot, sometimes carried on makeshift stretchers by relatives with panic in their eyes. The conditions were brutal. Dirt floors, kerosene lamps that filled the air with smoke, flies that had to be swatted away from wounds. No electricity. No incubators. No anesthesiologists standing by with syringes and machines. No doctors. Just Adama and her hands. She learned to read the language of bellies and backs and breaths, to tell the difference between pain that brings life and pain that brings danger, to recognize when a baby was merely slow and when it was trapped. In Tigray, she met her first asynclitic baby. The mother had labored for 20 hours. The local clinic's nurse had shrugged, said they didn't have the capacity for surgery, told the husband to prepare himself. Adama laid her hands on the woman's belly and felt it at once. The head tilted at the wrong angle, pressing against bone instead of slipping into place. "Most people would say this is God's will," she murmured. "But my grandmother would say, let's see if God is willing to be helped." She mapped the triangle, one hand above the pelvis, one near the mother's flank, one gently pressing near the top of the uterus. Pressure here, less there. Waiting, listening. The mother screamed, then gasped, then sobbed as the pressure inside her shifted. The baby turned, head aligning with the birth canal. Minutes later, that tiny body slid into Alma's waiting hands, slick and furious at being forced into the world. Word spread. Over 23 years, she delivered 847 babies. 127 of them breech. None of them lost to the presentation everyone else called impossible. In 2019, a medical researcher from Geneva arrived in Tigray. She carried a laptop and a translator and the skepticism of someone trained to trust data, not stories. She'd heard rumors of a midwife whose breech survival rates defied everything the textbooks predicted. They called her the ghost midwife of Tigray because any time officials tried to find her, she had already moved to the next village, chasing emergencies instead of interviews. For 3 months, the researcher followed her, took notes, recorded heart rates, documented outcomes, counted every mother who walked away with her baby in her arms. 847 deliveries, 127 breech presentations, 0 maternal deaths from breech complications, 0 infant deaths from breech complications. The report made its way to international conferences, medical journals, late-night discussions between specialists who didn't want to admit a woman with no formal degree had outperformed their best statistics. Then conflict erupted. Roads closed. Communication lines went dark. The ghost midwife disappeared. Hospitals in Europe and America discussed her over coffee and quietly moved on. They never imagined she might one day be pushing a mop down their hallway. A scream tore through the memory. Present. Amara's body arched off the operating table, tendons standing out in her neck. The monitor alarm shrieked, its steady beeping collapsing into jagged spikes. "Blood pressure spiking," a nurse shouted. "We are out of time." Helena lunged forward. "We have to abort this. Prep for C-section now." Minjay blocked her with one arm, never taking his eyes off the monitor. "She has 5 minutes," he said. "It's been 90 seconds. Helena stared at him, disbelief and fury warring in her expression. But under it all, something else flickered. Respect. Fear. The knowledge that if this worked, everything she believed about where expertise lived would have to change. The operating room, the shouting, the alarms, all of it blurred again as Adama's focus narrowed to a single point, her hands. She placed them on Amara's belly. The skin was hot. The muscles were rigid with pain and fear. Beneath, she felt it, the hard curve of a skull angled wrong, pressing into a space that could never fit it. She exhaled slowly. Seychelles, 1982. Ethiopia, 1998. Tigray, 2011. Her grandmother's voice in her ear, her mother's hands over hers. Kerosene lamps, dirt floors, the triangle. Those same hands that delivered babies on bare mattresses and mud-packed floors now hovered in a $2 million operating room, surrounded by machines that cost more than any home she'd ever lived in. Stories like this take days to research and script. If you're feeling this story, subscribe now, because if Adama's gift gets ignored again, you won't be here for what happens next. Having the knowledge was one thing. Having 5 minutes to save 2 lives while 10 of the world's best doctors watched was another. The clock started the moment her hands made contact. And what happened in the first 30 seconds made even Dr. Helena Bergstrom question everything she knew about medicine. The room shrank to a pulse, 135 beats per minute, then 133, 131. Each number flashed on the monitor like the tick of a metronome, counting down to something no one wanted to reach. Adama closed her eyes, not to escape, but to shut out everything that didn't matter. The glare of the surgical lights, the hiss of oxygen, the worried whispers of 10 doctors who had run out of answers, the knowledge that a man capable of murder was watching her every move. All of it faded. There was only warmth under her palms, skin stretched tight over muscle and life and fear. She inhaled slowly. Through Amara's belly, she felt it, the hard curve of the skull, not where it should be, tilted, pressing against bone it was never meant to meet. Her fingers traced invisible lines beneath the surface, mapping the baby's head, the fontanelles, the sutures separating each plate of bone. Her grandmother used to say the skull spoke a language of its own. If you were patient enough, your hands could learn to read it. She's feeling the sutures, the Japanese doctor murmured, unable to keep the wonder out of his voice. She's identifying the position by touch. That's impossible without imaging, the Australian doctor whispered back. Adama tuned them out. She slid one hand lower toward the curve of Amara's pelvis, pressed her palm flat just above the pubic bone. The other hand moved higher, fingers spreading along the lower curve of Amara's ribs. She stopped and waited. She didn't push, didn't twist, didn't yank the baby around like a wheel that needed forcing. She simply held the pressure, gentle, steady. An invitation instead of an order. Have you ever felt time stop? For everyone watching, it did. Seconds stretched. The monitor beeped. 129 beats per minute, 128, 127. Somewhere in the background, a nurse called out numbers, but it all sounded far away. Inside that stillness, Adama whispered, "Mon Dieu, protège Satimanman." God protect this little mother. Her thumbs softened, adjusting by millimeters. Her fingers shifted, nudging against the belly with the kind of precision that only comes from doing something hundreds of times in places where getting it wrong meant digging a grave. Under her hands, something responded. Not much. Not enough for the doctors to see. But she felt it. The skull moved a fraction. 1 degree, 2 degrees. The edge of bone that had been pressing against the wrong place began to glide in a new direction. The baby shifted, the Canadian doctor breathed. Did you see that? The position is changing. It might be spontaneous, the German doctor said, but even he didn't sound like he believed it. 130 beats per minute, 129, then suddenly, 128, 118. The monitor's tone changed, the rhythm flattening into a more urgent, compressed sound that made every muscle in the room tighten. Heart rate dropping, the nurse said, voice rising. 118 and falling. She's compressing the cord, Helena snapped. Panic broke through her professional calm like a crack through glass. We have to stop this, now. She lunged forward, reaching for Adama's hands. Minjay stepped between them, moving faster than anyone expected a man in a tailored suit to move. One hand on Helena's shoulder, the other held up like a barrier thick enough to stop a bullet. She has 5 minutes, he said. It's been 3. Helena stared at him like he'd lost his mind. If you don't let me intervene, you might lose both of them. If I do what you want, he said, voice low and dangerous, I definitely will. The heart monitor screamed, 112 beats per minute, 108. The air grew thin. Decelerations are severe, the Canadian doctor said. We're entering critical distress. She's suffocating that baby, the Australian doctor hissed. Amara screamed. The sound tore through the room, raw and jagged. Her body arched off the table, every muscle fighting against an enemy no one could see. Adama didn't flinch. She felt the cord, not directly, but in the way the baby's movement stalled, in the way the skull pushed back against her hand like it was trapped between two worlds. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. When you hit resistance, little one, you don't push harder. You get smarter. Adama lifted her right hand just a centimeter, shifted it to the side. Her left hand pressed a little higher, altering the angle. She brought in her third point of pressure, her fingertips gently pressing into the side of Amara's abdomen. The triangle. 3 points. 3 directions. 3 subtle forces guiding the baby's head toward the only path that didn't end in tragedy. She's repositioning, the Japanese doctor muttered, eyes wide. That's a modified Mahmoud maneuver, but she's doing it blind, the Israeli doctor finished. By feel alone. Sweat ran down Adama's temples. Her arms ached. Every muscle in her shoulders burned, but she didn't let up. She couldn't. Not now. Not when she could feel the baby wavering between danger and safety like a coin spinning on its edge. Come on, Tibebe, she whispered, barely audible over the alarms. Turn. You know where the door is. Amara sobbed. It hurts, she gasped. It hurts. I know, Adama said. Stay with me. We're almost there. 105 beats per minute. 102. 98. The nurse's voice shook. We're below 100. This is critical. Call it, the German doctor said. We have to call it and prep for emergency section. This is insane. No, Minjay snapped. No one moves unless she says so. Helena stared at Adama's hands, calloused, chemical-stained, steady. Then she looked at her own, soft, manicured, trained to wield scalpels and sign orders. Somewhere deep inside her, a terrifying thought took root. What if we've been wrong about where the real knowledge lives? Freeze that moment. Zoom in on Adama's face. Her eyes were closed, lashes damp with sweat. Her lips moved in silent prayer. Her entire life, Seychelles, Ethiopia, Tigray, Rochester, collapsed into the space between her palms and the tiny skull beneath them. This was what every birth, every risk, every night spent wondering if she'd chosen the right path had been training her for. Adama's hands, trained in fire. Helena's hands, trained in textbooks. 2 worlds, 1 table, 1 baby deciding which world to trust. If this moment has you holding your breath, imagine scrolling past and never knowing what happens. Subscribe so you never miss the ending to stories like this. The monitor wailed. 98 beats per minute, 96, 95. The line between life and death had never been thinner. Amara screamed again, the sound ripping from somewhere beyond words. Her hand shot out, grabbing for anything, anyone. Her fingers brushed Adama's wrist and held on like it was the only solid thing in the room. Adama pressed. Not harder, smarter. Her left hand shifted a fraction lower. Her right hand angled up, creating a gentle lift. Her fingertips on the side of Amara's belly applied a slow, circling pressure, encouraging the head to follow the path it had begun. Guide, don't force, she heard her mother's voice say. Babies know how to be born. Sometimes they just need someone to clear the path. A stillness fell over the room. The doctors leaned in. The nurse stopped breathing. For a heartbeat, just one, the monitor flatlined in rhythm but not in life. 95 beats per minute. 95. Then, under Adama's hands, it happened. The skull rolled. Not a tiny shift this time. A smooth, undeniable rotation. The pressure that had been driving into the wrong place slid away, finding the open space it had been missing. The baby's spine untwisted slightly, no longer pressing directly against Amara's. Everyone in that room felt it. A collective exhale no one had planned. The monitor beeped. 98 beats per minute. 104. 112. The nurse stumbled over her words. Heart rate rising. 112. 120. 128. That's not possible, the Australian doctor whispered. But it was. With 40 seconds left in Minjay's 5-minute deadline, the baby's heart rate hit 95, hovered on the edge of disaster, then climbed. Critical distress, then stabilization. Adama kept her hands where they were a moment longer. Let the baby settle into the new position. Let Amara's body learn the new balance. Only when she was sure did she slowly ease the pressure. Not all at once, bit by bit. She opened her eyes. Amara lay panting, tears streaking her cheeks, fingers still digging into Adama's wrist. The monitor beeped at a new rhythm now, 132 beats per minute, 138, 142, normal, stable, aligned. Adama exhaled, her arms shook, her back screamed, but her voice when she finally spoke was steady. The 5 minutes weren't over, and yet the hardest part, the gamble no one else in that room had been willing to make, was done. What happened in those final 40 seconds would be described the same way by every doctor who witnessed it. Impossible. For a moment, the room seemed to believe it was over. The monitor read 142 beats per minute. Normal. steady, alive. But Adama knew better. Turning the baby was only the first half of the nightmare. Her palms were still pressed to Amara's belly. Beneath them, the tiny body had finally found the right path, head now lining up with the birth canal instead of slamming against bone. The skull felt different, centered, no longer pushing at the wrong angles. The spine, once twisted against Amara's, had uncurled just enough to breathe. But the clock was still ticking. Amara's blood clotting disorder hadn't vanished. If they cut at the wrong time, in the wrong position, this operating room would become a crime scene. Adama pressed a little harder, just enough to lock the new alignment in place. Her fingers dug into soft flesh, her wrists screaming from the effort. "Turn, T-Bebe, turn," she whispered. "Stay where you are now. Don't go back." Amara cried out, the sound ripping up from somewhere deeper than her lungs. It clawed at the air, bounced off the cold metal surfaces, and sank into everyone's bones. The monitor alarm shrieked again. 95 beats per minute, then 92, then 90. "Could you make that choice with 40 seconds left?" Helena snapped. "That's enough," she yelled, voice cracking. "We're losing them." She lunged toward the table, toward Adama's hands, toward the only thing standing between her and the one action she knew how to perform in a crisis: cut. Every doctor would later describe what happened next the same way. They felt it, not saw, felt. Under Adama's hands, the baby shifted in one smooth, undeniable motion. The skull rolled the final few degrees, as if it had been waiting for the exact angle of pressure and the exact second of courage to move. The tiny spine unwound, freeing itself from the unnatural twist that had pressed into Amara's. 30 degrees. That was all. But it was the 30 degrees between life and death. The pressure that had been crushing the cord suddenly eased. The line of force that had been driving the skull into the wrong space now guided it toward the opening it had been missing all along. The monitor stuttered. 90 beats per minute, then 95. 102? Helena froze mid-step. The Canadian doctor leaned in, eyes scanning the readings. "Heart rate is climbing," he said, disbelief thick in his throat. 95, 102, 115. The numbers kept rising. 115, 128, 142. Normal, stable, aligned. The room went silent. Not the silence of doom this time, the silence of shock. Adama kept her hands where they were a second longer. She knew babies could slip back into bad positions if panic rushed the next step. Gently, slowly, she eased her pressure, letting the new orientation settle into place. Only when she was sure did she step back. Sweat soaked the collar of her uniform. Her arms trembled from effort. Her lower back screamed with every breath. But her voice was calm when she finally spoke. "Now you can do surgery." 5 words. Not the 5 words that had started this, "The baby can be turned," but another set that landed just as hard. The room didn't move. The idea was so opposite of what everyone had expected that it took a second to register. She wasn't claiming the birth. She wasn't pushing the doctors away. She was handing the power back to them. On one condition, "The baby is in position now," Adama said. "Head down, spine clear, no more direct pressure on the cord. You cut now, you don't release everything at once. You don't blow out her system. You have a chance." Helena stared at her. 100 pages of medical protocol fought in her head with a single, undeniable truth. The monitor didn't lie. Her eyes glistened. Tears she refused to let fall blurred the numbers for a second. "In 30 years, she whispered, barely audible, "I've never seen anything like that." Minjay looked from the monitor to Amara, then to Adama. This cleaning woman from Seychelles, whose hands smelled like bleach, had just done what 10 of the world's best doctors could not. She hadn't delivered the baby. She'd made delivery possible. "Prep for C-section," Helena said, voice hoarse but decisive. "Now, controlled, measured. We keep an eye on her clotting the entire time." The room snapped back into motion. Nurses moved like a well-oiled machine. Instruments clinked onto trays. Anesthesiologists checked lines. One of the doctors from Switzerland stepped to Helena's side, ready to assist. Another monitored Amara's vitals. Adama stepped away from the table, hands dangling at her sides. For the first time, she realized how badly they were shaking. She found herself drifting back toward the corner of the room, as if drawn by some invisible leash, dragging her back to the role everyone thought she belonged in. Invisible. Forgettable. She reached for the mop by reflex. No one tried to stop her. The surgical curtain went up. The bright light tightened its focus on the lower half of Amara's body. The upper half, her face, her eyes, the hand that still clutched the sheet, remained in shadow. "Amara," Helena said gently, leaning over her, "we're going to begin. Your baby is in a safer position now. We're going to bring her out. Her? Amara whispered. She's a girl? Helena managed a small smile. Yes, and she's fighting like one. Behind the curtain, steel met flesh, controlled, measured, no frantic cutting, no desperate rush. The tension that had filled every movement before now shifted into focused precision. 20 minutes. That's how long it took. Not the kind of 20 minutes you measure in clock ticks, the kind you measure in held breaths and silent prayers. Then it happened. The baby emerged. Tiny, slick, furious. For a heartbeat, the room hovered in the most terrifying sound of all. Silence. Then the cry came. Sharp, piercing, glorious. It cut through every layer of fear that had been building like sediment in that room. Slow motion, the nurse lifting the baby, the cord being clamped, the first towel wrapping around the small, flailing body, the doctor suctioning her nose and mouth, Amara's tears spilling sideways into her hair, Minjae's hand covering his mouth as his shoulders finally sagged. And in the background, barely visible near the door, Adama turning away, as if this had nothing to do with her. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, the Canadian doctor announced. Apgar scores 9 and 9. She's perfect. Amara sobbed, a sound that was part laughter, part pain, part sheer relief. Let me see her, she begged. They brought the baby around the curtain, placing her gently in the crook of Amara's arm. The newborn's cries softened, face nuzzling instinctively toward warmth and milk and safety. Minjae stepped closer, his hand shaking as he touched his daughter's hair for the first time. He had ordered people killed without blinking. Now his eyes glistened, just like Helena's. Adama watched from the corner, still clutching the mop handle. Her fingers were white around the wood. She didn't move closer, didn't interrupt. This part wasn't hers. It belonged to them, to the mother who had survived when she shouldn't have, to the father who had just learned that money wasn't the only power worth fearing, to the child who now had a future because someone who didn't belong in that room had walked in anyway. One by one, the doctors turned toward her. The one from India approached first. His voice was soft. Where did you train? Adama almost laughed. I didn't, she said. Not the way you mean. The Japanese doctor came next. I need to learn this, he said simply. Whatever you did, however you do it, I want to understand. The Israeli doctor nodded. There are places in my country where we could save lives with what you know. Helena came last. She walked slowly, the weight of 30 years of certainty hanging from her shoulders. When she stopped in front of Adama, she didn't look at the mop, didn't look at the uniform. She looked at her hands. Up close, the difference was stark. Helena's hands, soft, polished, steady from thousands of surgical hours. Adama's, cracked from chemicals, knuckles rough, nails short and uneven. Hands that had scrubbed toilets. Hands that had held the heads of crying mothers. Hands that had just guided a baby away from death. I'm sorry, Helena said, voice breaking on the second word. I was wrong. Adama swallowed. You were protecting your patient, she said quietly. That is your job. Helena shook her head. My job is to save lives. You did that, not me. Adama glanced at the curtain. You did the surgery, she said. You brought her out. We both did what we know. Helena nodded slowly, a tear finally escaping down her cheek. Then maybe what I know isn't enough anymore. The room began to empty. The doctors moved on to post-op protocols. Nurses cleaned, machines powered down. The baby's cries mellowed into soft, rhythmic breathing against her mother's chest. Adama slipped toward the door, mop still in hand. No one stopped her. No one thanked her, except Minjae. He turned just before she reached the hallway. Stay, he said. She paused. I need to pay you, he added. You already did, she replied. They're alive. He shook his head. Not like that. Their eyes met for a long, quiet second. Then Adama stepped into the hallway. The door swung shut behind her with a soft hiss. She thought that was the end of it. Just another story she'd carry alone. Another miracle that would be retold in whispers, then forgotten by everyone, except the people whose lives had been spared. 3 hours later, someone knocked on her apartment door. Hard enough to wake the whole building. She opened it in her threadbare pajamas, hair wrapped in a scarf, the smell of leftover lentils still in the air. Minjae Park stood in the hallway wearing the same suit. No guards, no doctors, just him. And what he offered changed everything. Because in Minjae's world, debts are always paid. And this debt was worth more than money. The first time Adama saw the check, she thought it was a mistake. It lay on the rickety table in her tiny apartment, the cheap wood sagging slightly under the weight of something that weighed almost nothing and meant more than anything she'd ever held. $1 million. More than 10 lifetimes of cleaning floors. You don't have to take it, Minjae said quietly, standing in her doorway like the night outside had followed him in. But I won't take it back. She stared at the numbers. Her throat felt tight. I didn't do it for money, she said. I know, he replied. That's exactly why you're the only person I trust to have it. He bought her a house next. A small, quiet home on a tree-lined street in Rochester. Not a mansion, not a showpiece. Just a place where the walls didn't smell like bleach, where the only humming sound at night was the refrigerator, not hospital lights that never turned off. For the first time in years, she woke up without her back screaming from a mattress too thin. She opened her windows and smelled grass, not disinfectant. She could sit on her own porch and drink tea without a clock telling her when to go scrub something. But she didn't stop working. Minjae hired attorneys, serious men and women in sharp suits, who sat across from hospital administrators and licensing boards and said things Adama never thought anyone would say on her behalf. Her experience matters. Her outcomes are undeniable. You've cited her work in your own conferences without knowing her name. It took months, meetings, paperwork, convincing people who had never set foot on a dirt floor that what happened on those floors mattered. 6 months later, Mayo Clinic announced a new role, Consultant High-Risk Obstetrics Unit. Not a doctor, not a surgeon, but no longer just the cleaner. Adama stood in front of a room of medical students for the first time, their laptops open, their eyes skeptical and curious all at once. This is called external cephalic version, the attending physician said, gesturing toward Adama. You've seen it in textbooks. Today, you'll see it from someone who's done it more times than all of us combined. Adama smiled, small and steady. I learned to do this before I learned to spell the words for it, she told them. You have your machines. Use them. They are good, but never forget your hands. They are older than your tools. They listened. Not all of them. Not all the time. Some still looked at her like she was a useful story, a colorful footnote in a career they hoped would be defined by published papers and prestigious fellowships. The medical establishment treated her as an assistant, not a peer. She sat in on meetings where her ideas were written down and repeated later by people with titles, as if they'd thought of them first. When awards were given, her name wasn't on the plaques. She would never be called doctor. And she was okay with that. On the wall of her living room, above a secondhand couch, and next to a framed photo of Celeste holding that first island baby, hung a new picture. A little girl with big eyes and a stubborn curl in her hair. Healthy, smiling, alive. On the frame, in careful handwriting, were the words, Adama Park. Minjae and Amara had named their daughter after the woman who gave her life. Sometimes the victory isn't in the title. It's in the heartbeat that shouldn't exist. In a child who carries your name as a living testament that, just once, the world listened to someone it usually ignored. Every month, Adama still sent money to Seychelles. More now. Enough that her sister didn't have to choose between school fees and groceries anymore. She sent funds to clinics in Ethiopia too, places where midwives worked under kerosene lamps, just like she had. She paid for clean sheets, for better lighting, for training programs that blended traditional techniques with modern safety protocols. She still lived simply. No luxury car, no designer clothes. Most of her income flowed outward, back along the roads that had shaped her. In the hospital, she became a quiet legend. Nurses would whisper, "Call Adama," when a birth wasn't going well. Residents would sneak into her sessions even when they weren't on rotation, pretending they just happened to be passing by. She never raised her voice, never demanded respect. She earned it, one heartbeat at a time. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe. These stories take days to craft, and it genuinely hurts to see people watch, feel something, and leave without supporting. Thank you for being here. 3 weeks after the night in the operating room, her phone rang. The number was blocked. She almost didn't answer. Hello? There was a pause. Then a woman's voice, filtered through a translator, reached her across continents. My name is Liu Wang, the translator said. I'm calling from Shanghai on her behalf. She is 8 months pregnant. Her doctors say her baby cannot be saved. In the background, Adama heard faint sobbing. That sound was the same in every language. I heard what you did in Minnesota, the translator continued. Please, she is begging you. Will you come? Adama closed her eyes. For a moment, she was 7 years old again, her grandmother's hands wrapped around hers on a warm island night. God gives some people knowing hands. You don't refuse the gift. Tell me where you are, Adama said softly. I'm coming. The next morning, She packed a worn suitcase. Inside, she placed 2 dresses, a pair of sturdy shoes, a folder with her consultant credentials, and a faded photograph of Celeste holding a newborn on her lap. She walked out of her house, locked the door, and looked at the old mop leaning against the porch wall, the one she'd brought home from the hospital out of habit. She left it there. Adama boarding a plane, the world below shrinking as she carries her hands, her history, and her quiet, stubborn knowledge into another impossible room she has not yet seen. Because some gifts aren't meant to stay hidden. They're meant to save the world, one heartbeat at a time. Based on real stories of traditional midwives whose knowledge saved lives, modern medicine couldn't.